Hello everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. This week, since it is launch day, I didn't want to take away from the excitement of launch day by going through a region that was not Legacy of Morgoth. But instead, I thought today would be a great opportunity for us to dive into what it takes to build the map of the game. How we go from starting from the original ideas all the way up through to the implementation and creation of the landscapes. So with that in mind, we're going to kind of go through a presentation of what our development process is. As everyone knows, this is a world design focused stream, and in this stream, we want to focus on world design stuff. I know there's a lot of things going on in the world right now. Let's keep this focused on Lord of the Rings Online and world design. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. I've been a senior world designer here on Lord of the Rings Online for a very long time. So why don't we just dive right into it? For those of you that are unaware, Legacy of Morgoth, our expansion pack for this year, launched today. I think the servers are up and available right now, so people are able to jump in and play. For those of you that are not able to do so yet, or are doing so and just want to have a little bit of a behind-the-scenes talk, this is your place for it. Right now, we can see in the background of my feed, I've got a view of the canyons of Ureshtar in the background there. But very soon, we're going to be jumping into the presentation. This is kind of the first time we've ever done anything like this. We often talk about the process of how to make our landscapes, but we don't usually go too deep into the technical aspects of it, showing the progress of what we're developing over the course of time. So if you have any questions about those things, feel free to drop them in. If you have any questions about things like housing, feel free to drop them in. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions about things like lag and balance and PVMP, those sorts of things. Those questions are better suited for someone whose wheelhouse covers those things, or for bringing those questions to Cordovan on Court of the Ring. So yeah, why don't we jump right into it? This is the first time I've ever done this sort of kind of stream and presentation. So bear with me as I adjust things here and there. So what we have going on here is I just kind of wanted to talk through the process of how we go about making a landscape. And in this case, specifically talking about what we went through to make the Valley of Ikerbon for the Legacy of Morgoth. All of our updates, anything that includes new landscape and all of that stuff always starts with research, and that's kind of what this slide is meant to represent. We use the Karenwin Fonstadt Atlas, which you can see in the lower corner here, as a great resource for us because it takes a lot of the information that comes from the Tolkien mythos and presents them in various map formats. Whenever we bring in someone new into the world team, we always make sure that they have a copy of this atlas with them. There are other resources out there as far as maps go, but generally this is the one we lean on the most. It has a huge appendices of information that can kind of tell us, oh, we're looking for a specific region, a specific area to go to, and we can kind of go there. The map in the background, we don't own this map. I believe this was from a poster for Lord of the Rings that kind of shows a little bit as well. We use maps, we reference maps heavily for inspiration in what we're making, and that's kind of what that one in the background is meant to represent. And then you see kind of here on the far side what looks like a list of files. They're all maps. In this particular case, for the Valley of Ikerbon, and just the general region around Harad Waith, near Harad, Far Harad, we wanted to have a good sense of what the history of that region is. So Chris Pearson, our lead world designer and one of our lore masters on the project, he put a lot of effort into basically going through this region, and each note you see in there, each file you see in there represents a territorial map through the different ages. what peoples held what territories, what major conflicts happened, what cities and locations kind of were built up and then fell down. All of these maps exist as reference for us when we're trying to figure out what to build, and for our content designers too when they're working on their quests and they want to delve into the history of a region. They can kind of reference these maps to kind of get a sense for, well, who held what and when, and what factions would be angry with each other and which ones worked well together. So that's the purpose of all of those. In addition to that, we also have our very lengthy region personality documentation, which again Chris Pearson puts together, that kind of gets into the fine details. You know, maps can only represent so much. We need the fine details for that sort of thing. We were actually talking about what our content for next year is, and he's working on kind of developing some of the initial stuff for that now. And you know, initially we asked for, you know, this smaller section of stuff, and I think he just kind of went off on a tangent on a weekend, and just, now we have this much stuff to start thinking about. So we'll go through some of the comments here. So we have Tillian that says, absolutely love the new regions. They're stunningly beautiful. Thank you. We're doing our best with the tools we have and the engine we have to try to present something that looks and feels modern and exciting to the players. And you know, I think we with each update we kind of learn new tricks, and we continue to remain dedicated to figuring out ways to improve the fidelity of the game. All right, let's see other questions. So MJ Dog says, maps are such a huge part of Tolkien's world building, so it's so great to have them be such a big part of the game. Yeah, I mean, we live and breathe based off of the maps here in Lord of the Rings Online. So we'll move on to our next slide now. So this slide, and let me see if I can move the logo here for a second. There we go. So now you can see the full image that we have. So this map represents kind of a broad strokes, like here are the kinds of biomes that we want to have represented in the space that we're building. You know, you can see on this map we have representations of you know, the Shield Isles and of the Cape of Umbar, and then and this is more extensive. The actual map that we have is much more extensive than what I'm showing here. But it shows off like our thought processes of like, okay, what kinds of things, you know, what kinds of biomes, what kinds of grasslands, trees, structures, even peoples that might be living in these areas. So this is by and large meant to really inform us to like what we should be building, how we should be building, those sorts of things. Another thing that's interesting about this map in particular is you might see some names that are somewhat unfamiliar to you. You know, things like, you know, Lakadin, which was formerly Sugedin. This map kind of shows what our process is as we start moving forward with things. How do we name things? How do we fit them into the world? And then in later maps, you can also see how we change things. So now this map that we're showing here, this represents general height levels. How close to water level do we feel like we want these regions to be? How, you know, where should they exist? Are they floodplains? Are they hills? Are they mountains? You know, so those sorts of things. The darker color is, the closer to ground level it is. Both these and the scene, the biome ideas, those biome concepts, those are both very high level, like, this is what we're thinking for this area kind of map. It is not necessarily representative of what our final look and feel for everything is going to be, but it kind of gives us a place to start working towards. You know, we can start working off the idea that, you know, if you see where Amberil is, this dark area here right in the center, you can kind of think of that as, oh, you know, this is going to be marshlands that are very, very close to water level with the river Ikrabon that flows through. So it's going to be darker. As you push further to the south, you kind of see how the hills build up, and there's this ridge line that runs along here. So this is a great way to kind of set the foundation for what we'll ultimately be building. Let's see. Softsnake GR says, the interesting part of mapping Lotro is how you scale things down from the map to actual game. By scale, I mean distance between everything. Yeah, that's one of the things that is challenging for us is, and I think we've leaned more into larger scale landscapes as the game got older. But the initial launch of the game, our landscapes were very condensed. We didn't want... we were building much more of a theme park game world as opposed to a open world, explorable game world. And it kind of shows with how those original regions are built and how they're much more compact in comparison to stuff that we've been building, newer stuff that we've been building. And there's definitely pros and cons to that sort of condensation of landscape. I think... and the Shire in particular is very heavily condensed to the point where there are even some like towns and villages that don't exist where they should exist, or are things like Weemoot, which are just like a few trailers hanging out and not actually a town, because we didn't have room for all of those things to build them up in a way that felt substantial. But the plus side of that is it does help new players enter the world and feel like they're experiencing kind of a good breadth of the landscape, the gameplay experience, while they're just getting their feet under them in the game. And there's definitely a benefit to that. You don't want a new player to really feel like they're lingering too long in any one area, at least as far as the content flow is taking them through that space. You want to show them interesting things and then help them move along into more interesting things and not really have a big kind of space in between that. But as a player gets older, as a player gets more experienced in the game, there's more room for that kind of interest in exploration, that finding that cozy zone of just like finding hilltops to hang out on and those sorts of things. So I think our team now tries to represent that more in what landscapes we're building. We want to give you more opportunities to find cool lookouts, find just like nice little corners to hang out in. That does present the challenge of helping those areas feel rich and full of content. I think the original regions of the game are pretty dense when it comes to content and finding quests to do and finding things to do. And then again, as the game world kind of spreads out, your density of content isn't as rich or isn't as heavy. And there are pros and cons to that as well. So let's see. Imagor says, a lot of things in patch notes don't work and a lot of things don't appear in patch notes. Sometimes, I think with that is a case of if you find something that is not lining up with the reality of things, please let us know. The more specific you can be, the better. That will really help us and our team kind of track down things. And sometimes some things in patch notes and there's a certain degree of things that, and I know some people will agree to disagree on this. There are certain things that really aren't big enough for notes, and there are other things that, might need bigger and more robust notes. And I think it's something that we work on over time and refine and try to find ways. Like, I am not going to list out every single specific little location that I've grounded a floating item or that I've, fixed a stuck spot kind of thing. Like, I will generically say, hey, stuck spots were fixed. Sometimes, too, a patch note can be released and gives information on things like exploits and whatnot. And we don't necessarily want to provide heavily detailed information in those patch notes, especially if those patch notes are going live to a bull roar or going out to the public before the servers have been brought down, because we don't want people taking the information that's in the patch notes and using it for for exploitive gains. Softnik GR asks, what does theme park mean? So I think my usage of the term theme park design is very much you create a small space that's often in a fishbowl with high walls all around, and it's a very encapsulated space. It is, the Shire, Arid Lewin, Breland, North Downs, where you're hitting tropes very hard. You are hitting a specific theme, but there isn't a lot of natural blending between those regions. Like, you go from Breland, for example, which is a fairly lush, verdant region, and then there's this hard line, and now you're in the Lonelands. And I think our modern designs, we try to avoid those hard lines and have a bit more of a blend between those regions. Thranduil says, how do you decide on the size of a biome or region you're building? Like, what point does a biome become too big? Well, that's actually a great question in regards to our planning and process and whatnot. We often look at what we've built in the past, how our team has reacted to being able to populate that, both from the world perspective, the content perspective, the game systems perspective, and we try to find a good balance between size of the world and what content can go in there. Ikerbon, Valley of Ikerbon, things like Cardoswan, Swanfleet and Cardalon, those are experiments in some new styles of world design, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in later slides as we get into the pre-production and planning parts of this presentation. So next up, this slide that we have here is a Heightmap representation. Those of you that are familiar with our landscape and whatnot should be able to kind of look at aspects of it and really be able to call it out. Like, you can see the Cape of Umbar there. You can see where the city of Umbar Baharbel is, and then right smack dab in the center, you can see this gray outline. And that outline is, when I was working on the initial height maps for these landscapes, that line represents the region of Amberul. So as I was developing the height map, this was kind of the area that I was planning on pasting it all in on top of. I put in these lines for my own reference, so I know where things are safe and where they can go and where they can't go. And it also helps me make sure that I'm not bleeding into areas other than what I should be working on. So these lines help me kind of be like, okay, stopping point, I don't want to go further to the left, because once I start going further to the left of these lines here, that's when I start running into the landscapes that were already built with Arador and the Cape of Umbar itself. Asharpion says, when are we getting more campsites for hunter travel? King's Gondor, Umbar, Shield Isles, and new expansions are all missing them. That might be something that we can discuss for quality of life updates. I don't have a specific answer for that, as I am not a systems designer, so I can't answer that specifically, but that feels like that might be a good opportunity for something like that to come in alongside with any additional Mariner ports as well. All right, next up. So now what we're seeing here is a representation of the landscape as sculpted using the tool World Machine. World Machine is a kind of plug-in based terrain generation system that uses programmatic and programmatic creation of a terrain based off of inputs. So you see here I have like the file input. Usually the file input is, we take our base height map. So what you saw in the previous slide, I'll export that out as a black and white image that I can then feed into this as a file input. And then I can start applying filters on top of that to get things like the various terrain effects, things like the erosions and whatnot going on. And this usually helps us get a good basis for our height map. Often what I end up doing too is, I might try starting to sculpt the landscape in World Machine with the base height map. And then, if I'm not quite getting what I wanted in terms of mountain ranges and whatnot, I might even just generate some random mountain shapes and whatnot that I can then use and bring into Photoshop as grayscale images and copy and paste on top of the existing height map and adjust as well. So this is a tool that I think has really, really helped us this is a tool in workflow, actually, that has really, really helped us to kind of accelerate the creation of our height maps and landscapes, and really help my team, the world team, get on the ground sooner and get things built sooner, so that we're not really getting in the way of the content team and the systems team when they need to do their own work. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes the content team needs things a little bit sooner. So that's when we try to do as much pre-planning for these sorts of things as we can as well. Next up, you can see this slide is a representation. This is looking south over Kudzagin. One of the things that we really wanted to do was try to play around with sand dunes and how could we generate sand dunes. I think ultimately where we landed with Kudzagin didn't use as much of the sand dune and just desert patterning that you see in here, but a lot of the things like the ridge lines and whatnot still exist, and the basis for this desert pattern is something that we can definitely use as a basis for a desert pattern in future areas. One of the nice things about creating kind of like samples of terrain is that we can just then take that grayscale image and copy it, paste it, rotate it however we want to in Photoshop in order to help generate that height map. It's actually really kind of funny and interesting how we've progressed so much. Game development, 3D modeling has progressed so much over the last 20, 30 years of 3D gaming. But our height map creation process, both for our game and I think a number of other engines and whatnot, still can leverage a grayscale image to create a height field. And that's really both entertaining and also a little cozy, right? Because you can just sit down with Photoshop and do your tinkering in the Photoshop file, save it out, and then just bring it right into the world. Imagor says, when you open any map location, we have a panel, what quests is listed for quest markers with different colors. How about allowing us to disable that panel to see full location map without moving panel to in different directions? So I think at some point we do want to do some updates to the map panel itself. I'm not sure when those are going to be coming in. It is a panel that can take you out of the game world pretty easily. So that's not ideal, especially if you're trying to figure out where to go on the fly or you're in the middle of combat. And I know there are some plugins that kind of mitigate that, UI plugins that mitigate that as well. But I think we do definitely want to think about the map panel itself, not necessarily the artwork within it, but how the map panel itself operates in the future. So next slide. Now, this slide represents the work done in Urashtar, and this was actually one of the hardest areas to get the initial height map built for, in part because the way our terrain works is we don't really support vertical surfaces, and I was trying to build these impressive plateaus with lots of cool erosion going on them, and it became really hard to do that and to have the erosion feel really what I wanted it to feel like. So this is the basis for it, and then what we introduced in the expansion pack, the base height map for this was much more heavily modified after the fact than I had originally wanted it to be. One of the nice things, though, is for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack, we did generate out an extensive amount of landscape all around the Cape of Umbar for Farview purposes. And the nice thing is with Imular, we really kind of liked the way Imular felt in terms of the height map that was there. So Imular was one of the regions that we didn't really do a ton of additional height map work for outside of where we needed to build towns and whatnot, because what we had built the previous year fit that space pretty well. And so now you can see here, these images are all basically chunks of our height map that show what the different regions of the Valley of Ikerbarn looks like. You know, we've got the Imular, or the Amberul, we've got Kudzagin, we've got Urashtar, and then at the very bottom we have Imular. And you can see in here, Imular also has that outline on it, again, going through and making sure I know where, like, okay, this is where the region is supposed to be, and so I can kind of, as I'm editing, kind of restrict myself to be within those spaces. And then here we have the final map. This is all of what is encompassed within Region 5 right now. So we do have a good amount of space that we've used up. You know, for those of you that, again, are familiar with our map, you can see where the Shield Isles are, you can see where the Isle Storm is, you can see the Cape of Umbar here, you can see the Valley of Ikerbarn, and then you can just see all of the extensive height map that has been built out from beyond there. It's not made specifically for anything at the moment. You know, we have marked in kind of where we want major rivers to be, so you can kind of see that reflected there. But otherwise, anything outside of playable area is something that we really, really do leave open for us to completely reinterpret when we get to those spaces. A lot of people, I remember back when we were working on, simultaneously working on the Angle of Mythythel and Swanfleet and Cardolan, there were players that, when they were playing in the Angle, prior to us patching in the landscape for Swanfleet and Cardolan, had a very different experience of the mountains around them. You know, to the south of the Angle was, you know, very high mountains in the distance and whatnot. And then one update happened, and all of a sudden all of that changed, and it was really interesting to see people kind of looking at that and digging through that and seeing off into the distance and seeing what they could see, and some people trying to get to where they could get. We try to be pretty good about limiting access to people in instances like that. You know, we don't want you to get too far away from the playable spaces, and often we don't let you get far away at all. Much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of some of the people that are in this chat right now. So Liquor Rock says, can Gondor be seen here? So yes, what you see here, so to create the region that we created, Region 5, which is Hardwaith, we took the base height map from Gondor, from, I think it was Region 4 Gondor. We took that as our basis for what we were going to build and kind of placed it where we wanted to, so that, you know, the Shield Isles and Umbar would kind of be in the center left side of everything, to give us room to do things like Hardwaith and explore Near Harad, Far Harad, and give us plenty of room to do that. You know, so I think where we're at right now with this height map, this positions us really well to continue growing this region without having to worry about things getting, you know, too much in the way. So yeah, we can click on to the next one here. So now what you see in this map, this is what the height map looked like after I had done all the work that I had done to create it and import it into the game. You can see where there are edges of where we had painted the terrain and where that stopped. You know, when we do far terrain painting, that's always generally a low effort paint job where we will put down a grass layer, put in, you know, some rocks and noise and whatnot there, do cliffs, and that's about the extent of it. It's not super high detail. What you can also see on this map is you can see those red outlines and those blue outlines. And that's how we markate the map when we're early in development, to know where region impassables are going to be, and to know where water flow is going to be going in this region. So wherever you see that blue marker on the terrain, that's where we expect a body of water to be running through. Some of those bodies of water were pretty easy to build into the terrain from the get-go. If you look at Urashtar, you can see the small rivers running through all of it. Those are actually built into the Heightmap. I didn't have to do a ton of work there. But then you look at Amberil, or you look in between Kudzagin and Imular, and you can see where we've painted the blue. And that's because, you know, we're anticipating some height changes in those water levels. So instead of trying to build the base water and then paint the height, we just paint down the water color itself, the water marker itself, so that we know where the water needs to be, and then we can go back in later and do more specific sculpting. It's actually really satisfying to look at the terrain in this way too, because you get such a great topographic sense. You know, I loved when we made the Swanfleet and Carlon maps, and how, you know, you look at them and it feels like a topographic map or a satellite map, which just feels satisfying to look at it and go like, you know, we made that and it looks actually kind of real, which is like it's a nice experience. Mario Justin says, I know you can't go underwater surface, but is water depth of various rivers, lakes, something you also consider? It is. Our scene file system interacts with water, so we can indicate to certain elements within our scenes, trees, rocks, reeds, bushes, like those sorts of things, what depth of water they can be allowed to appear in. And that's something that I played with a good amount in the marshes of Amberil, as a matter of fact. You know, the river gets pretty deep pretty quickly once you get off of the marshes. And part of the reason why we do that is to tell the scene file system, hey, like, I'm just going to brush down the scene file, not really caring where I'm putting it. And I'm going to allow it to think about, okay, I know I'm in, you know, this tree that I'm going to plop down. I know it's in the water. How deep is the water? Oh, no, that's too deep. I'm not going to place it there. Those sorts of things. So our water levels and the height map and the scene file system all kind of are aware of each other when we go to put them down, so that we can kind of have a little bit of control over where things show up in that way. We can also tell things to not show up on water, or we can tell things to float on top of the water and only float on top of the water. And we can tell things to, like, how far above or below the ground they should appear in a range. Like, we can, I think one of the things that I'm really, really happy that we got finally for Legacy of Morgoth is, for years and years and years, we had a feature in our scene file system that was a min height, max height below or above ground. And this feature worked in our tools. In our world building tool, I could create a scene file that had rocks in it, and I could tell the rocks, you can appear on the landscape anywhere between ground level and a meter below the ground. And it would work in World Builder. Awesome. No problems. It didn't work in Client. So this feature that we had to kind of help make the landscape feel more varied and interesting, it only worked in our tools. And with Legacy of Morgoth, we were actually able to get it working on landscape. So now we have things like rocks in Kudzagin, in Urashtar, and elsewhere in this region that can appear within a range above or below ground. We have our kapok trees in the marshy areas. Those are set up so that they can appear at certain intervals below the ground, so that it looks like they're more like embedded and growing in. And it allows us to have the same asset. It's like another vector for us to vary our assets on. So we can vary on scale, we can vary on rotation, and we can vary on the height that they're placed in the world. And that just helps us get a lot more out of our landscape with fewer assets. So next slide, we actually have some shots from our tools. We don't often show off our tools all that much, but these are shots taken from within the tools. In the upper left-hand corner, we have what is our block map panel. This is from our tool called Map Converter that allows us to basically look at all of the assignments of data on all of our land blocks, export them out into a Photoshop format, and then we can physically paint that information in. We can do this for things like Heightmap. We can do this for block map properties, things like, you get your now entering area name stuff, how day files change, hope and dread, temperature system, server boundaries, like a lot of that data is taken care of in Map Converter. We also have a representation of what our how we manage player level cap in areas. So like on Legendary server, you can only go into areas that are flagged as up to player level cap 50. What we're representing here is an image of Herodwaith and the areas that you can go at if the server is at level 150. The red lines mark basically that is the danger you're getting out of the area warning buffer. So if you were to enter into that area, you would get kicked back to your home point. In the top middle, we have a display of our terrain painting panel. This panel has all of our different terrain types that we have in it. Our rocks, our cliffs, our trees, our grass, and all the different properties that are associated with it, along with our paintbrush tools. These tools allow us to have paintbrushes the size of a land block, or to little small ones like a meter wide, that allow us fine control over how we're painting where, and a few different buttons to help with that. We've got a cliff painting system that when if you look down the bottom of that list, it says, Cliff Shagâna, Rust, Dark, Farview, Top, NS, and EW. Those are projection directions for terrain painting. So if we select one of those, the system automatically selects all three of them and will dynamically paint based off of the normal projection of the terrain that we're painting on, so that we can do cliffs pretty well. And then at the bottom you have just a picture from World Builder. That is the in-progress space of Urish Dar as I was working on it. One of the things that we'll show later on when we get to kind of more of a Q&A section is screenshots that I took over the course of development of Legacy of Morgoth. So that'll be the kind of slideshow running in the background. So next up, this is probably something that'll be most interesting to people here. This is what our planning maps look like. When we go to plan things, usually what we want to do is call out where our major POIs are, where the roads are, where the bodies of water are, and where the impassables are. And this is a helpful tool both for the world design team to know how we're building things, but also a great tool for our content designers to know where they can put things, where they should expect towns to be, where they should expect points of interest to be. So we try to call those out. One thing you'll notice here, and I kind of mentioned to it a little bit before, is there are some names that are different from what you might have been used to. And that's because one of the things that we do as we're working on things, as we're kind of going through and revising things, we look at the names we're using and we are like, oh, okay, well, we're hitting people pretty heavily with a lot of names that are flavored specifically for the region, and sometimes it's nice to have names that are a little bit more quickly grokkable and that are just more in, air quotes, Westron, right? So for example, we have like the crossing of Syllabal, or the bridge of Nambadir. Those are both things that, as we were working, we're like, okay, well, can we adjust these names to kind of make them feel more like a POI kind of thing that players can easily recognize. So the crossing of Syllabal turned into Rackwade, the bridge of Nambadir became the bridge of Princes, those sorts of things to kind of allow there to be some familiarity in what we're building. We, of course, always cover the roads in here as well. Roads are helpful for us to know kind of for flow through a region. And then you might notice, too, looking at this, that some locations on this planning map aren't where they are in the final game, and there may be some that are missing from this map, or there are some that were on this map but then are no longer here. And that's a byproduct of the process of development. You look at Ermach, for example, which was originally kind of up at the crook of the river, at the merging of the river Barug and the river Ikerbon. And as we were talking about navigation through regions and how it made sense for players to kind of get where they needed to get, we felt that we needed to move it. Often these maps are kind of all baked in, so they're not particularly dynamic. So this is like a first pass map. Usually we don't keep up on the revisions of our planning map once we're in heavy development, and instead rely on things like screenshots and quick paintovers to help our content team figure out where things need to go. You might also notice too on this map there are kind of these brighter glowy areas on each of the regions, and that was something that we were trying to pilot for this update, with the concept of kind of like core gameplay landscape and explorable landscape. So build more landscape in general than I think we originally were planning to use for the regions, and allow that to be spaces that you can get into and explore around, and then have that core gameplay area, those core gameplay areas, be where most of the content of a region is fixated. And I think we did a fairly good job of that. There's a lot of exploration space in this region. I think there's always this drive from our quest and content teams to fill out as much as they can fill out. Cover the ground completely with quests. And when we build these larger areas, that can be really challenging for them. So we were hoping the idea of kind of focusing gameplay more into specific areas and allowing other areas to kind of breathe and be more explorable would help kind of balance that out. The nice thing too about building these sorts of landscapes that are a little bit bigger and aren't as completely filled out is if in the future we want to go through and fill things out more, we have room to do that. All right, let me take a drink of water, because it's been a while since I've had anything to drink, and I've been talking for a while. So now what we have here is our almost production complete radar representation. This map is usually what we'll use as the basis for our map panel maps across the entirety of the region. It is done enough that we know where all of the major POIs are, the camps are, the roads are, the bodies of water, the impassables. It's done enough that we can take it and send it over to our UI artist to put his map spin on it. Luckily, his process works out in such a way that we can do that work, and then if we need to do updates, it's not terribly onerous to slide that work in after the fact. These kinds of views are always my favorite of any region too, because if we do our job right, those regions they look like you're staring down at an actual landscape from above. So now here you can see kind of what our paint over of a region might look like. So on the left we have the Valley of Ikrabon paint over, and this is basically the instruction guide for our UI artist to kind of take and turn into the final map for the expansion pack. So on the left you have our paint over. This is a layered Photoshop file that we then send on over for the UI treatment, and then on the right you can see the final map with all the work that our UI artist has done. And this is a process that we carry through for all of our regions. So each one of these, Ambaro, Kudzagin, Imular, and Urishtar, we each have individual Photoshop files for those regions as well. Next up is we have our paint over for what our stable collections map will look like. Whenever we introduce a new region like this, we want to make sure that we have our stable collection represented. So we try to provide additional input and additional information for the stable collection panel that our UI artist can take and can implement into here. So in this case, we needed to add in additional rivers in order to support the River Ikrabon, and then we needed to make sure the outlines of the region and all of the stable masters for the region were accounted for in this. Then we have our region map, our territory level map. So in this case, this is Haradwaith. We had a Haradwaith that, for the most part, near Harad looked pretty just barren and didn't have a lot of detail to it. So we needed to let our UI artists know, hey, we're introducing this. We need to add in these new features to the map so that it's representative of what we're building. So that representation came in the form of, hey, like, on the left, we've got the gray marks there. Those represents kind of more like tall, peaky mountains. And then, that kind of cream-colored section, those are canyons. And in the south, where it's green, those are dead forests. And then that section where Kudzagene would be, that feels just about right for what we want for Kudzagene, so we can leave that alone. And then adding in the rivers there to support that. And then I think that is it for that presentation, so we will close that out. And let's see if I can bring this back. Nope. Where am I? Where do I want? That's what I want. Sorry about that. So now we're here at the slideshow portion of our presentation. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I wanted to just kind of show off some of what we do for our process. Often whenever I'm building a region, I'm constantly taking screenshots of that region. I want to make sure that the people that I'm working with get an opportunity to see what's being worked as it's in progress. So I will regularly take a screenshot of what I'm working on, send it to our Teams chat so that we can see all of those things. So that's kind of what these all are. A lot of them are going to be Amberol and Urashtar focused. So that will be those two regions. You can see in the background of some of these too that the skies are very different than what they might have been. You can see the green landscapes. Usually as we're building our height maps, far terrain is the last thing that we're worried about. We're not as worried about what you can see in the distance. We want to really make sure that we hit home with what you're seeing first, what you're playing in first. And so that's where we really focus. And then as we get towards the end of our development cycle and start getting ready for things like bull roars and whatnot, that's really when we start thinking about the landscape direction of things. How we want to build out what you can see in the distance. How does that look? How does that feel? What sorts of things are we going to want to allude to in that distance? So yeah, that is basically my white paper on how we go about building our landscapes in Lord of the Rings Online. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you all might have. I think I covered most of the ones that are on here. It's been somewhat quiet here in chat today, which is completely okay. Siomon TV says, hello from France, how are you? I think we're doing great here. We're excited about launch day for Lord of the Rings Online Legacy of Morgoth. I know there have been a bunch of people that are in and playing now, and hopefully as the day progresses, others will be able to jump in and do that too. So yeah, if you have any other further questions, I'm definitely happy to answer. I know a lot of people are absorbing things because this was a big info dump. Like I said, it was very much a white paper. I may or may not be planning for some things at certain events in the future to have a talk similar to this as well. Let's see. So Tillian says, so cool to see all of this. Thanks for putting together all the slides to show your work that goes in the background. You're welcome. I think one of the things that's always challenging is we always have comments from people wanting to see the world building process. And that's really kind of difficult to show because often us as world designers, we bounce around a lot. Like I might be in World Builder, then I might have to pop in to see something in Client, and then I might need to go work in Photoshop. And so it's not often that when we're working on something, we're just doing strict world building without a ton around it. And so showing that can be hard in a live setting. But doing something like this where we kind of go through and talk about all the steps, because we have all of those steps available as images, basically, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of show the process. Oh, those scorpions, I love those scorpions. Let's see. Red Alive says, we're probably all playing and have the stream going in the background. And that is awesome. You know, I'm happy to hear people jumping in and playing. You know, I think one of the things that I'm planning to do shortly after this is to pop into the live worlds myself and just see what people are talking about. Soft Snake GR says, I wish you had a better plan for making huge cities like Umbar and Minas Tirith. Both cities I mentioned safer of the dents of the objects are around, and you cannot even relax. It's suffocating. I mean, to some degree, that's a big city, right? I think we still are learning what we need to do to build big cities, and to how to take those cities and make them performant and whatnot. I think we've learned a lot. We learned a lot from Minas Tirith, and now we've learned a lot from Umbar Baharbel, and we've developed processes that will help us work on things in the future. One of the things with Umbar Baharbel that, you know, really benefited us was the clustering of grouping entities together into single entities, and that helps reduce the entity count, which then also helps improve performance. And I think we're going to keep working on that. I have a couple of tasks on my plate that probably for either 43 or 44, we're going to go through and do some more of that kind of work in the city. So, Questing Dad says, I love seeing behind the scenes stuff and can't wait to jump into the expansion tonight. Great to hear that as well. Druid's Fire says, it would be cool to see you folks team up with Professor Corey to discuss how specific places were built versus the text. Certainly open to have those kinds of conversations. I am not the most lore-versed person, so Chris Pearson would probably be better to talk about how the reality of what we make compares to the text that has been written, or even the things that we need to create whole cloth. I think there's a lot of what we're doing now that is much more in the things we need to create vein than things that were already written. And those have both their own challenges and their own freedoms. Imagor says, it's great to see updated mission stables. How about updating Dockmasters? So Dockmasters were a stretch goal for me. I was hoping I could get to introducing a few more Dockmasters for the expansion pack. Unfortunately, time just was not on my side. Currently, I am working on revamping the Moria travel system, which I'm hoping to have tested and available as part of update 42.2, which is still a ways away, but I'm hoping to get that in so that when Angmar and Mordor unlock Moria, the Stable Master system there will be much more friendly and usable compared to how it is now. Let's see, a few more questions. We've got, do you already know how to proceed with these casual Stroll streams? So I have a list of all of the regions that we've done so far. There are a few streams that I've done that I don't think are up on YouTube yet, and I might need to talk with Cordovan a little bit about seeing if we can find those somewhere here on Twitch and getting those uploaded. But I do have a plan going forward. I was going to use today to kind of start the next series of region streams. But I wanted to really focus on something regarding Legacy of Morgoth today, since it is launch day. And starting in December, we'll get back to the usual region streams. I was, for a while, putting them up for vote and for see what the community wanted. But I think, going forward, I'm just going to try to go in the order that we've released them, because that's a little bit easier on my end in terms of like if I have time to prepare for things. So Mario Justum says, any chance we could see a bit of behind-the-scene pics for some older regions in future strolls? Maybe not for full presentations, but a bunch of various in-progress images. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those kinds of in-progress things for older regions. I've got some archival stuff from various regions I've worked on over the last few years, but that's still like presentation effort to put that together. There's nothing really like that you can see in client, which is the easiest way to present things when I'm doing a stream. Most important question, is there a cave claw hidden somewhere in the Valley of Icarbon? Much like, well, let me say it this way. The giant cave claw is hiding in the same place that my Dockmasters are. Old Man Ron says, I'm a little kind of things person. I like how my character can pack a bag while waiting to travel using the new milestone pack emote. I think those kinds of animation overrides are a great way to help players kind of express themselves. As the game continues to grow, I'm sure we will continue to add things like that to kind of help you personalize your character a little bit more. All right, and then Yao says, when you started Casual Strolls, you did show us some unused places like Shiny Fornost and that Elven Tower. Would be awesome to have a casual stroll dedicated to that in the future. I'm sure there are many hidden gems out there that you probably never used on the map. There are several locations that we've never used, so we'll get to those maybe at some point. I do have something to in the last few minutes after I answer a couple more questions that I'm gonna float out there to the community. But let's see. Old Benny says, "Hey Scenario, are the ore nodes being renamed to match the new name for the ore itself?" I'm not sure, because those are generally systems things. We try to inform the systems team about what kinds of objects should be on the landscape in those areas, what might make sense. I think sometimes, it's certainly easier to rename the container, the ore node itself, than it is to rename the item that comes out of it, because the item that comes out of it could have trickle-down naming stuff to a number of other things, whether it's, this ore crafted sword kind of thing. So that really depends on what time or impetus the game systems team has for that kind of work. Imagor says, Lothlorien homesteads, how about putting our homes up on talon trees? We currently don't have plans for Lothlorien homesteads. We do have plans for Rivendell homesteads. The designer who's working on those is back on them now. He and I are going to talk at some point today, probably, to kind of do some information passing, since it's been a while since he's built housing. I think after that, there's no shortage of neighborhoods that we would like to build. I'd really like to build Umbari neighborhoods at some point. And then I was also, I forget, maybe it was during my Extra Life stream, someone was talking about really wishing they had a snowy neighborhood, and there was a part of me that was thinking that maybe a winter home style neighborhood up in the north might be interesting to have as well. So, but we've got a lot of time to think about building those things. So one more thing just to talk about with the community before I sign off for the day. One of the things, as you may have heard already, is that Update 43 is meant to be kind of our quality of life update, right? Where we want to make sure that we get in, things to improve the quality of life of the game. And our world team was in our meeting earlier in this week. We usually have a few full team meetings where they're working meetings, and one of the things we were talking about was targeting some of the older dungeons in the game for updates. So one of the things that I'm going to try to get out there by the end of the week, if not end of the week, sometime middle of next week, is a poll on our message boards or through some other platform to talk about dungeons that might need to be updated. We're going to focus on dungeons in Eriador and have them also be non-instance. So keep an eye out for that. And the top 3 voted on interiors and dungeons from that list will be ones that we'll target for updating as part of our quality of life update. So welcome, Beef Missile. You joined just in time to see me wrap up. Oh, Benny, yes, update the dungeons visually, kind of bring them up to modern standards, spending a little bit more effort on them in the way that we build most of our dungeons now. So anyways, it is past 3 o'clock, so it is time for me to wrap up this stream. Thank you everyone for hanging out, taking a look at the guts of building a region, all the mapping and planning that goes into it. At some point very soon, I'll be doing another We Have a Cave Stroll stream with Orion. I think we were hoping for next week, but I gotta follow up on that. If not next week, soon after that, but we'll let you know. In the meantime, Legacy of Morgoth is out and available now, so if you've already pre-purchased it, you should be able to just log in and update and jump right in. If you haven't gotten it yet and you are excited about and interested in Legacy of Morgoth, you can purchase it through the Lotro store. So anyways, thank you everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the Legacy of Morgoth as much as I enjoyed making it for you all. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we'll see you in Middle-earth.